Welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Dr. Michael Heiser. Dr. Michael Heiser, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind, would you tell us a little bit about your work and how you would describe the work that you've written and all the podcasts you've done and all the lectures that you've given?
Do you want me to isolate that to a specific area or just, open the fire hydrant?
I guess open the fire hydrant. That would be okay, because I mean, you've talked about so many different topics that I think a lot of listeners would be interested to hear about some of the variety of different topics that you've covered.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm by training, I'm a biblical scholar and ancient, Near Eastern studies scholar. I have a couple of master's degrees and a PhD, in those relevant fields. So what I produce in terms of nonfiction is typically oriented by those things. I write reference content. I've published under peer review. My job for 15 years has been a scholar in residence for a Bible software company and do ancient language databases and write reference content with them. But, I also blog a lot on the side, and I write fiction as well. So I've always been interested in anything sort of old and strange. And, things like, ancient aliens and some of this fringe alternative history. Was Jesus married to Mary Magdalene? All that sort of stuff. That appeals to me. I'm interested in that sort of thing. But what I want people, I don't want to tell people don't be interested in these things. What I do want to tell them is, hey, you need to think critically about what you're being asked to believe, and always check claims against primary sources. Primary sources are important. Letting ancient people speak for themselves. So I've blogged a lot. I have a drmsh.com is my homepage, but you'll find individual blogs there. I have something called the Naked Bible blog where I do Bible stuff, and we call it Naked Bible. And the podcast, there's a Naked Bible podcast as well. We call it that because we're trying to strip away denominational preferences and creeds and things like that. Just take the Bible in its own ancient context and let it sort of be what it is. And the podcast this year passed 6 million downloads. I mean, it's pretty well known to people who care about Bible stuff. But there's also paleobabble, UFO religions, where I blog about, again, some of these alternative worldviews and fringe ideas, and the sort of religious implications of both, believing in ancient aliens or the whole extraterrestrial question. My fiction is oriented in that direction. I have a YouTube channel called Fringe Pop 321 where we do 15, 20-minute episodes on fringe and alternative topics, again, with the emphasis of trying to direct people to primary sources and asking, good critical questions. Paranormal, I have another podcast where we discuss paranormal topics using peer-reviewed literature on those topics. So I'm kind of all over the place. 2 novels, The Facade and The Portent, really allow me to kind of play with the topics as opposed to doing nonfiction. But I'm interested in it all, and so I like to try to do something useful in all these spaces.
Okay, well, perfect. So one of the topics, I guess, how I first came across your work was when you worked with Chris White with the Ancient Aliens Debunked, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. I guess just right off the bat, the first question I'd ask is, did aliens exist in the ancient world? And the way that we think about aliens in the sense of extraterrestrial beings that had, very, advanced technologies. I mean, did they exist?
Well, I don't think we have any evidence for aliens now. I mean, what I tell people is, look, I'm not opposed to the idea that there are extraterrestrials and that, and what I mean by that is intelligent, extraterrestrial life. I think it'd be kind of neat, presuming that they're not hostile or anything like that. I'm rooting for them and fun. I don't see any logical obstacle as a biblical scholar. But at the bottom, the bottom line is you have to have evidence for this. I mean, you can only explain certain things in the ancient world as aliens if you know aliens exist or existed. And that's a biological claim that requires biological evidence, at least. You can't say, well, I saw this thing and it moved through the sky and it did this crazy maneuver, and I don't know of any of our aircraft that can do that. So you can't answer one question, are there aliens, with another question, what was that? That's illogical. It's incoherent thinking. So for me to say, yeah, there probably were aliens in the ancient world, I have to first know that there are aliens, period. And to date, again, we don't have any evidence for that. We have questions. People bring up the Drake equation all the time, and that mathematically, all the stars out there, there just has to be extraterrestrial life. Well, actually, no, there doesn't have to be. Every element of the Drake equation is literally invented. It's an invented equation. It's all every facet of it is a guess. So is that science? Doesn't look like science to me. We had writers like Michael Crichton basically publicly ridiculed the equation for that very reason. That this is this isn't evidence. It's a made up equation. That's what it is. There are actually really serious difficulties when it comes to the parameters for life as we know it to exist elsewhere. I mean, and this isn't a religious thing. It's called the rare earth view. There are Christians who use this like to talk about what they call the anthropic principle and make it a theological question. But there are complete atheists, scientists out there who take the rare earth view that, there are just some really serious obstacles to life existing elsewhere in terms of radiation, asteroid, impacts, the biological forces, biochemical, geochemical, ingredients coming together in the right way, that you find that an ingredient for life somewhere, let's say on an asteroid, that doesn't mean anything. That's an ingredient. It's not, it's part of the recipe. It's not, it doesn't produce anything. It has to come together in the right way with all the other stuff. So to date, we just don't have any evidence for this, even though, again, I'd like it to be true. But if I went out and said, yeah, this is true, I wouldn't be telling the truth. I'd either be making something up and wishing, or I'd be lying. I don't really want to do either.
What do you think of this show, Ancient Aliens? That was, I guess it's still on the History Channel. I think I was reading that they're in their 14th season or something.
Oh, yeah. Something ridiculous like that. And honestly, I separate out of respect for the extraterrestrial hypothesis or the extraterrestrial question, which I think is a good question. It's a question that goes all the way back to BC era, Aristotle and people like that. I mean, this is an old question. Are there other worlds? And if there are they inhabited? It's a respectful question. It's a good question. It's deserving of attention. Ancient Aliens is none of that. Ancient Aliens is a cartoon. Okay, its own writers say it's ridiculous. I mean, what more do you need? It presents to the viewer some of the worst thinking that I've ever seen on TV. Just incoherent, illogic, non sequitur sort of stuff. And the data is often drawn from like 19th century theosophical literature and Lovecraftian horror. And if the 19th century hadn't happened, we probably wouldn't have Ancient Aliens. The information is out of date. It's incoherently handled. The primary sources are either ignored or mangled. It's awful. And so I think it doesn't help. It doesn't help treat the extraterrestrial question with the seriousness that it deserves. It's a caricature. So other than that, I don't really have any opinion of the show. But I think there's obvious reasons why it's lasted so long. They're the same reasons why shows that have some supernatural element or some extraterrestrial element are popular. I mean, I loved the X-Files. I loved Stranger Things. People generally love these shows because they find the materialistic, mechanistic, atheistic worldview that is foisted on them so often to be completely unsatisfying. People want to believe that there is a transcendent reality beyond themselves and the world that they experience with their five senses. It's just that simple. And in terms of, we'll do some biblical theology here. In terms of biblical theology, the Bible puts forth the idea that we are wired to think that way. We are wired to want that and to suspect and to deep down know and yearn for this transcendent reality. So I find it completely understandable on one hand why shows like Ancient Aliens get the audience that it does, or gets the audience that it does, because they tap into this yearning, this need for mystery, this fascination, but they just fill it with crap is what they do. It's really unfortunate. It's so easy to debunk so much of what is in that show. And the YouTube, production by Chris, it's 3 hours long. The last time I looked, it had 7 million views, and it's been taken offline like 4 or 5 times. It's so, if you look at that, if you watch that video, it's free. It's 3 hours. I'm glad you mentioned Chris, because people think I produced that thing because I'm in it. No, it's Chris's production, and he did a good job, and his team. The answers to some of these, quote unquote, questions that baffle scientists, in Ancient Aliens are so simple and so obvious that you just have to wonder, did Ancient Aliens hire the dumbest people on the planet to do this, or are they just filtering data so that you never see it and never ask good questions? I don't know.
When it comes to that, the Ancient Aliens debunked. I'm not saying this to be a brown noser at all. I've actually watched it probably 5 times all the way through, from start to finish. And
he deserves some kind of medal for that.
So I just because I'm just so fast. Granted, I didn't listen to it back to back. This is over the course of years, but even the thing about the Anunnaki. I remember how that started off.
Look, like I'll go on shows like Coast to Coast AM, and I really like the people there. I've always been treated well. They've always been fair. When it was Art Bell, and now it's George Norrie, and I've had other guest hosts too. I don't have a complaint in the world about Coast to Coast AM. I've been on there over 30 times. I enjoy it. But I've gone on shows like that, and it has a very large audience, and said things like, "Look, it's not a question that Von Daniken or Zechariah Sitchin or somebody on Ancient Aliens who's parroting Sitchin. It's not a question that they're mistranslating parts of cuneiform tablets. That isn't the question. The issue is that the claims of Sitchin and others are not even in the tablets. So show me one line of one tablet, just one. This is all I'm asking for. One line of one tablet that has things like the Anunnaki being associated with Nibiru in any way, or the Anunnaki coming from some planet, or the Nibiru cycling through our solar system every 3,600 years. Just show me one line. Now, you would think when I go on a show like that and say stuff like that, how easy would it be if Mike wasn't telling the truth? How easy would it be to make Mike shut up and go away? All you got to do is produce one line. And it's been close to 20 years now, and I'm still waiting. And I'm never going to get that line because it doesn't exist. The Ancient Aliens world is full of things like this, where stuff is just literally made up and presented to people with, spooky music and people with wrinkled brows, and lines like scientists are baffled, by this or that. And it's just simply not true. But it's done in such a way that people like what they hear, and they're never going to go check. Either they don't want to spend the time, or they don't have, my field is Semitic languages and all this kind of, they don't have the training to check this stuff. They don't know where the resources are. Most people think that the world of science and scholarship lives on the internet. It doesn't. All of the serious stuff, or I should say 90% of the serious stuff, does not live on the internet. It never winds up on the internet because it's not free for distribution. It's published under peer review in peer-reviewed journals and books, and that's where it stays. It never gets posted. So no, scientists aren't baffled by this. Egyptologists aren't like cringing in the fetal position in the corner when you bring up, this or that little factoid from Ancient Aliens. It's probably been addressed 25, 30 times in publications. It's just that people don't know the material exists, and they don't know how to access it. Because scholars, and this is the scholars' fault, because scholars and scholarly publishers don't care enough about the public and serving the public interest to make this content accessible. And I speak that to their shame. I think it's a crying shame for the way the academic publishing industry works. I mean, I've been in it for a long time. I know how it works. I've had scholars ask me to take links away on my website that lead to their articles. So I'll reply and say, just so I understand this, you don't want the public looking at your work, correct? And they'll actually say, correct.
Oh, gosh.
And so I have to take stuff down. This to me, science and scholarship in the humanities, the ancient texts and whatnot, I believe sincerely that all of that should serve the public interest. And the public is not served when they are cut off from really good research and data. They're just not. And it's this air of contempt that academia has, I think, toward the populace. And it's like, look, don't complain to me about people that watching Ancient Aliens and believing it. Yes, I agree with you. It's crap. But don't complain about it because you're doing nothing to address it, are you?
Because
you're part of the system that doesn't address it.
Because most of these articles that are written at an academic level, they're just really only available through schools' libraries.
Exactly. You have to have access to the academic journal databases. And in the main ones are things like ProQuest, which any university, seminary, college, community college library will have that. But what you need, especially for the humanities, are journal databases like JSTOR and the ATLA religion database. And that your community college isn't going to have, your public library isn't going to have. You have to find some way, through a membership. You pay them an annual membership, and you can get online access to some of these things and download stuff in PDF. But that's not common knowledge to the public that these databases exist. Why would I care about a database? They don't even know what's in them. They don't know that they exist. If they do know that they exist, well, I don't have a university in my town, so I guess I'm out of luck. That's the situation. So Ancient Aliens can come up with these this silly stuff and claim that it's some kind of mystery and insoluble, and only the guests that we have, only the talking heads we have on the show have the answer for you. No, that isn't. None of it's true. But the public is just like the alternative. The reason it's not true doesn't pop into their head, the average viewer, when they're watching this, because there's this information gap.
Well, I think too the information. I mean, it seems so provocative and over the top that you have people that have a doctor in front of their name saying something like, "Did this was an episode that I remember watching a part of? It was did ancient aliens interfere in a civil war battle between the North and the South?" And it's like,
That's great.
yeah, you hear something like that, and you're thinking like, that's not even ancient. I mean, there are really old people alive today that met people that were born in the 1860s.
Right. And so what they'll do is they'll have somebody like, I won't well, I will mention his name. He deserves it. Sasha Lesson,
Okay.
PhD. He's the one of the round of the new Anunnaki, Sitchin promoters. Great. He knows what he's talking about. Yeah, his doctorate's in psychology. Okay. Psychologists don't work with ancient texts. They don't know the first thing about them. Having a doctorate in medicine or education or accounting, okay, doesn't give you the acumen and the experience, really even the nuts and bolts basic know-how of a field expert in some other field. Okay, I have a PhD in Hebrew studies. Do you really want me as your lawyer? Okay, do you really want me, giving you advice on engineering if you're going to build a building or a skyscraper? You'd be an idiot. Okay, having DR in front of your name means that you have a high level of competence in one particular field. That's what it means. It doesn't mean you know everything about everything. It means you know a lot about one thing. Okay, that's what it is. But people get, their eyes glaze over, their mind shuts down when they see DR, on the TV screen. Oh, he must know. No, actually, he doesn't.
Well, especially some of these guys too. I mean, I can't remember which one it is, or which guy it is. I don't know if it was the bearded guy or not, but I know one of them had a degree in like nuclear. They were like a nuclear physicist. I remember that was always the thing under their name. It was whatever the name was, nuclear physicist.
Well, that was Stanton Friedman. Yeah, he had
okay.
master's in nuclear physics, and he did. He had an MA in nuclear physics and worked in nuclear labs.
And I mean, I just remember even thinking, I remember there was a phase on the History Channel where they just talked about aliens and World War II stuff, and that was it. And I think that was the mid 2000s. I remember that a lot. And I even thought at the time when I was a teenager, I was like, what is that? What is this? How does this connect? I mean, there are times, I understand if we're talking about the theory of the spacecraft itself, maybe, but
right.
I always just kind of thought that this sounded really smart, and that was it. They just ran with it. Like, he's a nuclear physicist. That must mean he's, like what you're saying. I mean, just because that, yeah.
I'm not a nuclear physicist, so you must be smart.
Yeah.
But this is common kind of, reflex thinking, that you see, in the public. And again, unless you have somebody, and honestly, it shouldn't be me. I mean, this should just be common knowledge, but just stop you as a viewer and say, hey, you realize that guy knows a good bit about nuclear physics, but there's no guarantee he knows much about anything else. I mean, he may not even know how to change the oil in his car. Do you want him performing heart surgery on you? Or would you rather have the PhD in cardiology for that? Again, people don't stop to think about really what a PhD or an MD or a Juris Doctor, the legal degree is. It's narrow. These things are by definition to give someone expertise in a very narrow, sort of field in one particular field. Now, yeah, you got to be smart. I think for the most part, that's a fair statement. To get one of these degrees, I think they're more about perseverance than anything. Mm-hmm. But, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, you got to be smart for that. It's smarter than the average bear, but it's still one field. It's what it is. So let's not pretend that this person is an authority on this other thing over here, because the odds are very, very high that they're not. And, that just isn't a thought that occurs to the average viewer.
So I guess with all of that said, I mean, are there certain ancient texts or, I don't know, drawings on a building or, I don't know, statues that are, I guess, credible? I mean, I know for sure. I know the opposite of that is, I remember I forgot what peoples it was. I think it was some group in Latin America, and you guys talked about this in the episode. And I actually saw the episode in real time when it came out too, of the golden bug that that they said was an airplane, and then they said we blew it up to life size, but we didn't change one thing. And the first thing I was thinking is you blew it up to real size and you gave it an engine, but. Right. What do you mean you didn't change one thing? But I guess that's the opposite. But are there actual real ones where you look and you're like, okay, this one I could see. This is weird. Like, I don't know how it was built, or I don't know what this means. I mean, have you seen anything like that? If you're talking
about things like that, it's an easy no, because like there's the bug, and you know what? Oh, we tested this to see if it was aerodynamic, and it turns out dun, 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 it was. Well, I got news for you. Flying insects are aerodynamic. Wow, what a profound thought. We just did an episode on Fringe Pop on the Sakara bird. And there they made models, except they altered the vertical versus horizontal tail fin because they had to make it flight worthy. It's a bird. If you actually blow it up, it's got little eyes, a little beak, little mouth there. I mean, it's a bird, and birds are aerodynamic. Again, that's super profound. The Vimanas, these flying houses. Again, they're not flight worthy at all. So I can't think of a single example that A makes sense. But again, we're back to B. For me to have that's an alien craft on the table, I first have to know that there are aliens. I can't use this sculpture that I don't really know what it is or what it was meant to do, and then use that as evidence for this other unknown thing. That's called a non sequitur. You're drawing a conclusion which does not follow. This should be, it's no longer, but it should be logic 101. You don't use one unknown to prove another unknown. The one unknown is not proof for the second unknown. They are both unknown. Okay, so they can't really serve one another. But this is the kind of thing you get. And usually, again, some of these are so easy to debunk. Like the Egyptian on the alien on the walls of the tomb of Seti the First. Well, let's try a high digital high resolution image of that and see what we have. Or the light bulbs, the Dendera light bulbs. If you blow that one up, you get little snakes inside. They have eyes and a little mouth. They're smiling at you. They're thinking, you idiot, you're going to think we're a filament in a light bulb. Well, the joke's on you. I mean, a lot of these take almost no work to dig into and examine. There are some, like you mentioned, drawings, like these Aboriginal drawings and stuff like that. The problem is we don't have texts, and again, I'm going to show my bias here and be upfront with it. I think you need texts to explain objects. Now, there are archaeologists out there who think, well, just hand me an object and I'll tell you exactly what they used it for. Well, if you're really honest with us, you're guessing, because this is the beauty and the profundity of language, of writing, because writing preserves thought. Okay, a person who knows how to write can preserve what was going on inside his or her head at any given moment for someone 5,000 years later. That's what makes it so amazing. Objects don't have that. I'm sorry, but they don't. Ideally, you would have both. Objects can be easily misunderstood. Like these so-called Anunnaki figurines. These serpentine figurines. They're from Mesopotamia. That's where the Anunnaki come from. Yeah, guess what? Guess where they were found? They were found in prehistoric layers. You know what prehistory means? Okay, go back to History of Civ. That God forbid, are we at least teaching people this in school anymore? Prehistory is before writing. There's nothing written on them. There's nothing written around them. They were actually found in garbage dumps. Would you really do that if this was your deity? Who knows what it is? Who knows what it meant to these people? The truth is, we just don't know. And we can't make claims about objects without texts that specifically connect to the objects. And we don't have that. So you're just kind of stuck. And again, my predilection, this is why I don't have a show in its 14th season, is to say, you know what? We don't know. We don't know. And as of today, we can't know. It's a whole lot sexier to erect a narrative about ancient extraterrestrials on top of this object. That'll get renewed. I'm not even getting started over here, but that'll get renewed. And that's essentially what you've got.
I mean, if you went to History Channel and you said, I want to do a show that's about aliens in the Bible, and they said, oh, I thought there's only the 3 verses that talk about it, Ezekiel and Daniel and one spot in Revelation maybe. And you're like, no, I read the Bible a little bit more. I think there's enough for several seasons. They would probably, I don't know, I think they might actually consider it.
Yeah, I just have to sear my conscience.
Oh, yeah, you'd have to be a total sellout and lie. Right. But if you pitch that idea, I don't know, I think they'd hear it. I want to ask one more question related to the whole alien talk, and I'm sure you've probably been asked this several times, but the whole idea that the pyramids could not have been built by people, like people at that time, is that actually, I mean, from your understanding of the pyramids, I mean, is that even valid at all, or?
No. It's not. I mean, people who don't believe this, who are listening to this, just go to DRMSH or Google drmsh.com pyramids construction, something like that, and you'll wind up finding a page where I have 5 or 6 articles on pyramid construction that comes from literature that you can't find on the internet. Now, to be fair and honest, the authors of those articles, who are experts in ancient engineering, they don't know for sure that any or all of their methods were used, but what they do know is that they could work. using the technology of the day. I could direct people to Jean-Pierre Houdin's internal ramp theory of the pyramids. Right now, that's the best theory going. It does seem to have some very good circumstantial evidence for it, as far as internal imaging of the pyramids, revealing what looks like, until they break a pyramid up a little bit, they're not going to know. Looks like an internal ramp that would justify his theory. It explains the Grand Gallery using a counterweight system. I could direct people to Wally Wallington's website, even though if you go there now, you'd have to buy the CD. There's not much of him on YouTube anymore. But it'll be the best $15 you ever spent. I used to show Wally Wallington's video. This was the retired contractor in Flint, Michigan, who decided to build, like a Stonehenge replica in his backyard, using no modern equipment, not even the wheel. Okay, and he developed his method because of an on-site problem he had at one of his job sites. They had to move a stone, and the crane would not fit in the space. So he was responsible for figuring a way to move the stone, and he did. And it set him off on this path of Wally Wallington is. The video is funny because he changes shirts about 10 times, and his butt crack showing. It's the old kind of thing. But he's a master of applied physics. He knows how to use weight as a counterweight to lift heavy objects that are beyond human capability. And you watch the video. I used to use it when I taught Egyptology at the local university here. I filled in for 3 years for some sabbatical people. And I would tell the students, look, we all know the drill here. You're history majors. This is elective credit. Yeah, you're going to like the class, but chances are when you leave here, you're going to forget most of it. But I'm going to tell you right now, mark this day on your calendar. This day, you need to be here because you will never forget what I show you on this day. And that would pique their curiosity, and they'd show up. And I was right, because I show Wally erecting a 25,000-pound slab in his backyard by himself, raising it. He pours it, he moves it across the yard, he erects it by himself. And once you see him do it, he actually used the method to move his garage across his yard. His entire garage by himself. Well, his son-in-law helped him with that one. But the principles are the same. And so once you see it, you can never unsee it. And you think to yourself, I am such an idiot. This is so simple. Why did I never think of this? And the answer is because you didn't have the problem. Ancient people developed technology and techniques to do the things they wanted to do. They were not primitive technological illiterates. It doesn't mean they were inventing laser beams. They're not inventing anti-gravity. Okay, they're using, though, technology with the tools at their means, and they can accomplish these tasks. So, yeah, there are a number of ways to explain how, the pyramids were built, how the stones at Baalbek were laid, the trilithon. Again, you could go to fringepop321.com for the web and look at some of these. I give people resource material. That's published under peer review on these topics. You go to YouTube, fringepop321.com. You can watch the episode on the Baalbek Trilithon or the pyramids or whatever. It's just simply not true. Well, the guys at Nova, I watched a Nova special, and these 3 guys who did Nova stuff, engineers, they couldn't figure this out. Well, you know why? Because they're using power tools and hydraulics. They're not thinking like an ancient Egyptian would. And on top of that, we now have more textual evidence that's actually been published popularly. It was published, in scholarship a few years earlier than this. But in the last few years, there have been papyrus discovered that talk about the use of a harbor during Khufu's era with one of Khufu's relatives. I believe it was a son-in-law, who was the guy who managed the flow of the stones down the Nile for the use of the pyramid. So we know it was built during Khufu's reign. We know it was built by people. We have enough textual evidence to prove that people did it and when they did it during Khufu's reign. Then from that point on, it's okay. How would you do this? How would you do that? What's the most coherent, explanation for how they might do this using, again, applied physics with the means disposable at their day? And there are a good number of theories as to how they could have done it. We don't know for sure which methods were used, but there are workable methods.
Well, I think that's a very clear and concise answer. The person that you mentioned, I've already forgotten his name. The person that's able to
Wally Wallington. You go up to the website is called theforgottentechnology.com. Okay. And in the old days there was more Wally on the internet. You'll only see 2 or 3 minute snippets of him now. But they still sell his CD. I think it's $15 the last time I looked. And it's just home video. It's not a production, that you'd put on TV. It's just Wally doing his thing.
And I've seen some of it too, and it is really impressive. At least from the little footage that I saw,
the coolest thing he does. I'll admit the garage is pretty impressive, but the coolest thing he does is he shows how Egyptians could arrive at the Pythagorean theorem without a ruler, just with simple math, and create tools that have the right angles for moving, again, these stones. And he just takes a stick, and it's what he calls the 2, 3, 4 principle. A squared, b squared, c squared, all that. And he shows you how it takes him 2 minutes to show you how to do it. And then he produces it looks like it's made out of plywood. He just uses wood. It looks like the surface of waves. And he puts a 500-pound block on one end. And he just wraps he wraps some rope around it and puts a lever on it, and he can just spin that thing back and forth like it's nothing, because the angles of the wave, the device he makes, match perfectly the angles that the stone needs, so that its weight is manageable. He just does little things like this, to show you how manpower would have been maximized, again, just using angles and physics and whatnot. It's again, once you see it, you wonder, how in the world did I not think about that? And the answer is you didn't have to solve the problem.
Oh, that totally makes sense. I wanted to switch topics a little bit and talk to you about, I guess, supernatural worldview. And if you wouldn't mind, maybe could you describe it, I guess, in the simplest terms for people that are, let's say for your common church-going person in America, where, how would you describe a supernatural worldview to them? And what do you think are some ways that people, I guess, misunderstand it when you say supernatural? When they think supernatural, I mean, what are some misconceptions that you think most people have when they hear that?
Yeah, I think at its most basic, a supernatural worldview would be the belief that there is a reality that exists beyond the material world. That is the world that you experience and can detect and can experiment on with your 5 senses, and then using the tools of science, which obviously operate on the basis of your 5 senses: what you see, what you can touch, taste, smell, all that kind of stuff. It's the idea that there's a reality that isn't subject to those tools and those senses, and that other reality is home to intelligent beings. So at the sort of at the base level, that's what it would be. There's other intelligences out there. There is this other reality. It's not just empty space, so to speak. It's populated, if I can use that word, with other beings who are intelligent. So that would be your alternate world, your supernatural world. And the beings don't conform, again, to the materialistic side of things, to that reality. They transcend it. They're beyond it. And that doesn't mean they're uncreated. I do believe every effect has to have a cause, so they have to have a cause as well. But it does mean, again, that what they are and where they are is fundamentally, ontologically different than what we are and where we are.
How would you describe the worldview that most modern people have, or at least Westerners have? Like, how would you describe that to, I don't know, another culture?
That's an interesting qualification. I would say just generally, let's take the word Westerner out of it. Generally, I would say that most people do embrace that worldview, that there is a supernatural world, supernatural plane of reality. Okay. In the West, I think the numbers are fewer because of culture, culture and history. We are taught, and I'm not saying this is correct, but this is the way most people are taught. We're taught that Enlightenment thinking and the scientific method are incompatible with there being, again, another reality, a supernatural reality. I don't think that's true at all. And I think there are important thinkers, certainly in the Enlightenment, and of course today, who are expert scientists, that would not say that they are incompatible. But in the West, that's how we're taught. And so I think generally in the West, there are relatively fewer people who would, embrace that reality. But let me say this, though, even though I think that's fair, that the modern West, if you could tally them up, there would be, like a per capita percentage lower than the rest of the world who believe in this. I think that there are still more in the West that believe it than proponents of an atheistic, materialistic worldview would have you think. We live in an era where we have a lot of militant atheism, and we have the internet. And these people, love an audience. And I think that their message gets magnified because of, the information age and the internet. And so it creates this assumption among people that this is just growing leaps and bounds, and it's going to swallow up, the other worldview, And I really don't think that's true. I think it has grown a little bit, but I think even in the West, it's still far outnumbered. I would challenge the village atheist, this way. If you think that, then the onus is on you to explain why so many people who have, advanced degrees in hard science fields, who go to the same, universities as your atheist colleagues, or teach in the same faculties as your atheist college, publish their atheist colleagues, and publish in the same journals, go to the same conferences, they're members of the same societies, they have the same, graduate advisors, all this stuff. Why so many of them don't buy into your materialistic, atheistic worldview. And if you're challenged, prove that there's lots of them out there that don't buy into that. Well, that's really easy. American Scientific Affiliation, ASA.org. There are thousands of scientists who are members of that. It is a broadly Christian organization. You could also go to the Christian College, Coalition of Christian College and Universities website. They've got hundreds of institutional members. Every one of those institutions has physics faculties, chemistry faculties, biology faculties, astronomy, geology faculties. Just do the math. There are thousands, tens of thousands of people with degrees in the hard sciences who embrace a supernaturalistic worldview. And so the question to the village atheist is, why? Why do they find what you're promoting so unsatisfactory and so unpersuasive? Why? And they've only got a couple of options. Well, all those people are lying. They really secretly are like atheists, just like me. Or they're just deluded, self-deluded or deluded. They've been tricked. Okay, well, can you show me the scientifically peer-reviewed research that leads you to that conclusion? Where is that? In other words, let me see you use your scientific method. Let's see you use it. And what do they have? At the end of the day, they've got an unanswerable question. That's what they've got. And so the onus is on them to do something with the reality that is the world they live in. Most people aren't buying what they're selling. And a lot of the people who aren't buying what they're selling are people who are intellectually at the same level or higher than them. So why is that?
That's a very fair question. And
it's not unreasonable. That is not an unreasonable question.
No, not at all. I guess one thing I wanted to ask, and I know this is for you, I think you've literally probably talked about this hundreds of hours on TV, or not TV, in recordings, and probably also on TV too. But I guess that being that, what is the importance of a supernatural worldview, I guess, from a Christian standpoint and from a biblical standpoint? I know that there's so many layers to that, but again, I've grown up in America. I grew up, in the church and around the church and going to, church services and Bible studies and things like that. And to me, it seems like, and I don't know if again, I haven't done the research on this particularly, but just in conversations I've had and even sometimes in my own life, it seems like there's a little bit of a divorcing between supernatural activity that can happen or does exist in like your actual practical life. So things like, people don't really think about, let's say, like demons or angels really that often, or, they kind of think about it somewhat, but it's not really that big of a thing. And, you dive deeper into some of your work. Actually, before this interview, I had it kind of on in the background, to be fair, but you did it was like a 50-minute thing about, the Elohim and the gods, lowercase gods. And, I know, like I said, that you have a lot of information about this topic, but in a nutshell, how would you, describe, I guess, why having a supernatural worldview is important to Christians beyond the simple, okay, well, I believe that God exists. I believe Jesus existed like in the flesh and that he died for our sins. Like, I guess, how would you explain why it's more than that? It's more than just there's God, there's Jesus, there's Satan, and there's a couple demons and angels that exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you started the question, I thought you were going to go a different direction with it. So if we focus the question on, like you said, the average Christian in church, who they have some Bible familiarity and they want to be Christians, they want to understand their Bible, so on and so forth. So if we take that subset, of the population and aim the question at them, I would say that you need to, angelology, which is a kind of a clunky term, but the heavenly host, what the Bible says about the heavenly host and rebellion in the heavenly sphere, in the supernatural realm, and all this kind of angel demon stuff. Angels are important because the heavenly host serves as a template in many respects, and some would be surprising to the average Christian. They serve as a template for how God views humanity. If you really think about the Bible, its meta-narrative, a story, you're invariably led to that conclusion. And then once you get into the nuts and bolts, the data support the conclusion. And what I mean by that is, what does God want? What does he want? What's the whole thing about? God wants a family, essentially. God, had the heavenly hosts around him. They are present, according to Job 38, at the foundation of the world, before there was humanity. So they witness these things. God is not content with them, as his supernatural family, if you will. God wants humans. He wants a human family. He therefore has to create them. He wants, create them a world that they can inhabit. They cannot come to him, so he is going to go to them. It doesn't mean we're deities or divinities or anything like that. It means we are his representations. We are his representatives. We are his proxies. We are his stand-ins. We are, in effect, his partners on this planet to do the things he wants us to do and to enjoy the things he has made for us. That's how God looks at humanity. So the Bible actually strikes this relationship between the supernatural family of God and the earthly family of God in the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1. Specifically, this is why we have plurals in Genesis 1:26. And then the story plays out. There is rebellion in both spheres. God doesn't abandon his original plan. He works the plan. He cannot change humans as he has made them. He's made them his imagers, his proxies, and to accomplish that task, he shares his attributes with them, one of which is freedom. You cannot eliminate free will and still have humanity being in the image of God. You can't do it. Now, there are Christians who try to eliminate free will, but the fact is, free will is real. It's an extension of God's communicable attributes to us, and not only to us, but to the supernatural beings that are part of his other family, because again, we have the plurals in the imaging language in Genesis 1. All that means that evil is not something God predestined. It's not something God coerces. It's not something God wants or needs. Evil arises from the decision that God made to create beings like himself, knowing that they would abuse the good gift and fail. Why? Because they aren't him. They don't have his perfect nature. He is the only perfect being. And so in just that little bit, you've got who we are, that's identity. You've got what our mission is, that's purpose. And you also have why we have evil. Now, you can get mad at God, for making that decision. You can lie and say you would prefer to be a robot, or you would prefer to have God strip away free will, or just destroy us all to get rid of evil, but you'd be lying. Because everyone wants to live. Life is a gift. And you have to be taught, to reject that idea. Intuitively, we want to live. We want, to experience this thing we call life. And we have evil and catastrophe creep in. And the impulse is to blame God. We are taught a flawed view of God that has God either predestinating, the rape of a child or something like that, or a murder or whatever, whatever kind of hardship. We have this invented caricature of God that's often invented in our churches, not just, by the village atheist out there in the internet. And it's flawed. It's a flawed view. And you have to go back to this whole decision of God wanting a family. He had families in both spheres. He wants them united on this planet. They represent him. They should be one family. That means humanity is fit for sacred space. Human life is sacred by the definition. If you are human, you are an imager of God, and it should be the most natural thing in the world for you to be fit for sacred space. This is where God wants you. He wants you with him. And the fact that life isn't that way, again, is part of the story that the Bible presents. But from the very beginning, it is set off. Humanity is juxtaposed to the supernatural family God has, the supernatural realm, because God wants us with him and with them. We should be one family, one blended family. It explodes into big concepts about our identity, our destiny, how God looks at us. God grieves that there's evil. He knew there would be evil, but again, he would rather have his creatures fail and have evil enter into his world than to not have us at all. I mean, these are thoughts that really matter in the scope of not just theology, but in life. And if you can sort of grasp these things from the beginning, then you as the Christian, again, since this is our target audience for the question, what happens in the spiritual world in the biblical story with their rebellion and their obedience really matters for what God is also plotting on earth in the human enterprise, because the two things are going to intersect from this point on, and they do for the rest of the biblical story. You have three rebellions in the supernatural world that invariably affect and infect humanity, and why the world is such a mess. Humanity becomes the prize for this spiritual conflict. Spiritual warfare is a term we throw around a lot, and we make it cartoonish, like we go into rooms and shout at demons or something. That's ridiculous. Spiritual warfare is fundamentally about the conflict between two kingdoms, between good and evil, and humanity is the prize to be gained or lost. Again, it gives meaning, to life, and it gives identity and mission and purpose and all these sorts of things. So as human history plays out in the pages of Scripture, there's this other narrative that's also playing out and is inextricably tied to the human story. Now, if you didn't know any of that, and what I try to do in my book Unseen Realm is unfold that. I give you the complete framework for understanding this. The subtitle of the Unseen Realm. This is my book, and it's we don't typically advertise this, but it's an academic book, but it's very readable. I had a great editor. It's a book with footnotes. It's sold 100,000 copies. That's almost unheard of in publishing. Okay, it has touched a nerve. And the reason it's touched a nerve is because I ask people to do a simple thing. Read the Bible as though you were an ancient person, because guess what? That's who produced the thing under inspiration. Read it that way. And these things will emerge to you. I will give you the lay of the land. I will give you the framework for understanding, what is actually going on in the biblical story. And the subtitle of the book is intentional. It says, Recovering the Supernatural Worldview of the Bible. Because we, even as Christians, have erased it. We are modern. We are products of modernity. We tend to read the Bible and accept only the supernatural elements that we think we need. God, Jesus, angels, demons, maybe Satan. Okay, now we're done. There's so much more to it. But again, you don't have to know any of that to read the Bible and get the gospel and know, what the plan of salvation is. Absolutely. My book doesn't change any of that. What it does is it makes the story much more rich. It will show you how biblical passages intersect and interconnect deliberately and intelligently with each other. It will give you a framework for understanding the whole thing. That is what's missing. We have a lot of people in our churches that their heads are filled with data, Bible data, and they have no framework in which to put it. So the Bible becomes something that really doesn't make sense. Everything has to be about Jesus because that's the only thing I can understand. No, it all leads to, again, Jesus is the central figure. It leads to that in some way and contributes to, him as the linchpin of the whole plan of God. That's indisputable. But there's a lot going on in the Bible that isn't directly about Jesus, but that informs, again, just the biblical world and the way God thinks about you and the way you need to think about God in very deliberate, intentional, intelligent ways. And so if you really want to know your Bible, this thing that we say is inspired, that God bothered to prompt people to produce, okay, then this stuff matters. It matters for understanding the biblical story in more of its fullness. So angelology is one of those things that it's easy to put on the periphery, and we have done it intentionally. We've demythologized our Bible. That's what mainstream Christianity has done. It has demythologized the Bible, keeping only the parts that it needs to still have a meaningful conversation about God and Christianity. And I think it does an injustice, to not only Scripture, but it sort of makes God's intentions here peripheral. And that strikes me as very wrong to do. It strikes me as presumptuous to do.
I mean, there's so many cases too. I mean, I think you even mentioned it in one of your lectures where the idea that, God's not putting just filler in the Bible. It's not like he's like, okay, it's got to, I mean, you even said it exactly like this. I mean, God's not saying, okay, well, it's got to hit this many pages. And
right.
I'm not that happy with Second Chronicles, but I think First Kings will make up for it. I mean, God, God's not thinking like
Right.
that. I mean, so like even, you have situations like, the Witch of Endor story and I think First Samuel 28. And, I think that's right. Maybe I don't know. It might be the wrong
Yeah,
chapter.
we need something here so that people turn the page,
Yeah. I mean, so you hear stories like that and you read it and you're just like, oh, okay. And then, I mean, again, from my own background, just people that I've spoken to and my own experiences. I mean, I'm not saying everyone's like that, but it just seems passages like that are really not talked about. Or, even the things, the sons of God in Genesis, isn't that Genesis 6, where basically where the whole Nephilim come up. And then I think kind of what happens is that you have people, especially now because of the internet, where they go on crazy tangents when you hear the Nephilim. So, I mean, I know I mean, that's such a big topic that I don't even want to ask you about that because it will go another hour and I want to be respectful of your time.
Well, I actually brought that up at a conference recently in Branson where I said, look, you all know, I think Genesis 6 is important. We've dismissed this because there's a fear factor, in affirming that there's a supernatural thing going on here, and so we invent theories, to explain it away, and you get rebuttals like, well, if the sons of God are supernatural beings, how does that work, with the women and the Nephilim? That's a good question. The short answer is I don't really know because I'm not a deity. But I have another question for you. How does the incarnation work? How does the Trinity work? How does the concept of salvation work? I mean, how does the hypostatic union, Jesus 100% God, 100%, how does that work? Okay, we don't have answers for things that God does in a number of cases. So let's just be honest with that. But on the other hand, I told this crowd, look, the Great Commission does not say, go ye into all the world and hunt for Nephilim. Okay, it doesn't say go into all the world and solve this or that, conspiracy. It just doesn't say this stuff. Go into all the world and find out who's in the Illuminati. No, it doesn't say any of this stuff. We are hopelessly distracted. And I challenged them. I said, look, do you think the world would be different if you in this room who are interested in this stuff, if you put as much time into the question of how do I get my neighbor the gospel, or how do I do something that looks like it's fulfilling the Great Commission? If I put as many hours into that as I do hunting for Nephilim or the Illuminati or the Rosicrucians or the Freemasons, would that make any difference in anybody's life? I think it would. And so we need to really be able to tell what is peripheral from what is not. And again, yes, it's important. Yes, Genesis 6 bleeds into a lot of other passages that are important. If you embrace the supernatural worldview of that passage, other passages will make sense in light of it. That's true. Again, that's what I try to do in Unseen Realm. But at the end of the day, if that's why you open your Bible, You keep going back to that thing or Bible prophecy or something like that, and you omit or diminish the task that Jesus actually did give you. You're a failure. I mean, that's just it. At the end of the day, you fail. So let's try not to fail. Let's just try to be successes where we should be. At least make the effort.
And I think it kind of ties back to something that you mentioned earlier in the interview, where I think that there are a lot of people that are Christian, or maybe even they're culturally Christian, but they don't necessarily have a relationship with God. But when they hear stuff like that, they hear about Enoch, or they hear about the Nephilim, or they hear about these things, it sounds so foreign to them, and it sounds so unique, almost like the ancient aliens, where you say something like, the Anunnaki had advanced wristwatches on their arms, and it's like, whoa, look at this. This means something. This is it was made in a genetic lab in 10,000 BC or whatever they say, and it sounds really interesting because it's so because it's so you've never heard it before, and I think that happens a little bit with in the Christian realm, where you have all these videos being published, and sometimes you're just like, wow, I've never heard this before, and you're interested, and then I don't know, it seems like what you're saying is that
all of these claims, whether they be biblical claims about sons of God, Nephilim, or ancient aliens claims, or something in the middle where you have Christians creating videos that essentially baptize the ancient alien narrative. They are all testable by the same means. They can all be tested for their coherence. What's the difference between the claim of an angel and an alien? Well, one is we have to really pull back, and that is there this other reality? To reduce that question, it goes to the old, is there a God or not question. So what has greater explanatory power? That there's a God or that there isn't a God? And if you want to side with God, and I think there are very good reasons for doing that, then you have to ask yourself, well, since we can't subject God to the tools of science, we can't put him under a microscope and look for, you create a hypothesis and watch for repetition and all this. We have to address the question by means of coherence, just logical coherence. And people have defended the thesis that God exists for millennia, and it's never been overturned. Why? Because it's philosophically, intellectually, logically coherent. So if it's coherent, then we have to ask ourselves another question. Well, if it's very possible that there could be a God, could that God actually do anything? Or is he like a vegetable? How does this, what makes more sense? God exists, he does things, or he doesn't do anything? And so you ask very simple questions, and that takes you to, well, God could create other beings like himself, lesser, but like himself. Maybe they're embodied, maybe they're not. You start to whittle away at the questions. That's how you do that. You have to do the same thing with the ancient alien question. It's a little bit different because there you have a biological claim. Even if you have a metaphysical claim, they come from another universe. Well, okay, let's start there. Do we know that there are other universes? Well, we have this equation that shows that it could be on. That's true. Okay, we do have equations like that, but since we're dealing with the material universe, okay, and another material universe, just one that's different than ours, we would still need material evidence for that material universe of some kind. Yeah, well, okay, do we have that? I mean, you're really trying to, the ancient alien question is a mixture of coherent thinking plus physical science, things that can be subjected to scientific tools, where the other side really only plays in one arena. But it's fair on both levels to ask the probative questions and see which one at the end of the day makes more sense and where sort of the limitations are. You're going to hit the wall, faster with the ancient aliens question, because you do bring in physical, science, the materialistic element there, and that is testable. And so far, to this point, we don't have the physical evidence to nail that down. If we did, then you have a whole different set of questions. Okay, now we know that there are aliens out there who existed or did exist at one time. Did they come here? Well, how would we know? So you have to ask yourself, okay, we have this object, we have this thing. Is that more explainable, through this reality we know or some other reality? So you're really asking the same, kinds of questions. So the process is really similar, even though the two things have very distinct differences about them. One is more, worthy of thought than the other. But, we typically, have a lot of people today, because we're modern and we live in a technological society, and because people don't want to be accountable to God just generally. That bugs them. The question isn't just, is there a God? Because if there is, then it's like, oh, well, is it reasonable to think he might want something from us or expect something from us because he would have created us? And what might those things? Humans hunger for self-determination and autonomy. They don't like to be told what to do. And especially if there are eternal consequences to it, they especially don't want to hear that. And so that actually, I think, is a big point of resistance to the God narrative and moves people to the alien narrative, because you don't have any of that there. You can have your advanced alien who in effect would be a god anyway, to us. So I could have my space religion or whatever, my ET deity, whatever. And especially if he tells me that he's going to help me evolve to become like him. Ooh, I like that. People opt for that because they don't have the personal accountability on such a significant scale, like eternal consequences.
Right. I think that's a very good summary of everything. I totally agree with that point that you made. Definitely, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Like I said, I mean, I've come across your work, a while back, and I'm glad we were able to do this interview. And I know that there's so many more topics we can cover, and hopefully, sometime we'll be able to do a second interview at least. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Michael Heiser. And I guess let's call you Michael. That sounds weird to say the whole thing.
Mike is good enough.
All right, well, Mike, well, definitely, thank you so much for coming on. I know you already kind of mentioned a little bit of how we can follow the work that you're doing, but are you on Twitter, or do you have a Facebook page or anything like that?
Yeah, I do have a Facebook page. There's an author page. I have a personal page, but I also have an author page. And the personal page, you can't, I don't know, Facebook has this limitation on people who can follow you. But the author page, Michael S. Heiser author page, doesn't have that. So that would be a better place to go. You can follow me on Twitter at MS Heiser. That's MSHEISER for Twitter. But if you forget those things, you can always go to my homepage, DR as in Dr. MSH. Those are my initials. So drmsh.com, and, sign up for following me, however you want to do that, or just, browse around the site. You'll be able to find anything that I do somewhere on the site. It'll be hooked in there. That's sort of the nerve center.
And then too, you also have a newer book out as well, right?
Yeah, the one that just came out actually on Halloween is called The World Turned Upside Down: Finding the Gospel in Stranger Things. That's the TV show. I love the show Stranger Things. And as I've told a number of interviewers already, this was an easy book to write. Not just because I love the show, but I think people would be shocked, especially if they have no interest and little background in Christianity. I think people would be shocked at how intelligently the plot and the subplots of Stranger Things map over to what I would call the supernatural epic of the Bible, the supernatural story behind Jesus. So I'm not trying in this book to say, oh, look at this scene in Stranger Things. It's just like the scene in the gospel, and try to come up with some allegory. No, this is actually much more thoughtful. And I don't think the creators of Stranger Things are doing any of this intentionally. It's just that good storytelling will map to good storytelling. And the gospel is a story well told. And Stranger Things they just set a high bar for just the intelligence of the way the thing is put together. So I would encourage people, if you love the show, whether you're Christian or not, get the book. This will be a great book to start discussions with people who are not Christians, or maybe kids in the youth group, or your own kids or something like that, who love the show, and to get them to think about the show on a different level altogether, and frankly think about the Bible in a different level, in a different way too.
Okay, well, great. Well, definitely, I'll have to check it out. I mean, I remember when we were emailing back and forth, and you brought up this book, and I thought, I was thinking like, oh, that'd be cool, but I've only watched a little bit of, I've only seen clips of the show, so I know everyone says like it's super great and it's like one of the most praised television shows, or I guess whatever, just shows. I guess it's not on television, but I don't know. I never got into it. I don't know. I'm 28.
28. So you're a bit in between. The show captures, your sort of teenage, up into the 20s, millennial person, because the main characters are these kids, these 4 kids plus the fifth one, the girl, is 11. Then you get some other kids too, and a few adults, but it gets the kids, but it also gets the adults who would be their parents, because it's set in the 1980s. I graduated from high school in 1981. So when my daughter convinced me to watch the show for the first time, it was about 3 episodes into the first season. What caught me, there was just a number of things that drew me in, but it was really fascinating as to how cleverly they reproduced iconic 80s content in the show, and also the town. My kids asked me, was there really a time when you could just, like, you and a bunch of your friends could just ride around on your bikes and nobody had to be there, and when it got dark you just went home, and yeah, that's what you did. You were free, and this is how you spent your day. And I'm like, yep. There really was. This is how we grew up. I could identify with the town, with the kids, the store that the one woman works in. Yeah, I've been in that store. It's just the attention to detail is just crazy. It's just so well done on so many levels. But then the storyline, you get introduced right away to an otherworldly reality that is sinister at the beginning, and you're just I was just hooked, because it just sort of pushed all the buttons for me. But it's really well done. And again, for somebody who has the biblical theology and the gospel as story in my own head, when I'm watching the show and then the publisher proposed this idea, I thought, oh yeah, this is going to be fun. And it was so easy to do because the stories are just so well told. It's again, if you're a fan of the show, for anybody in your audience, I think you're going to be really pleased by the book and also surprised at how things connect in it.
Wow. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I mean, you've talked and written about so many topics that, I mean, you're definitely you know what you're talking about, it seems like. Or if you don't know what you're talking about, you certainly can make it up. But I believe
Yeah,
you. So
I don't have to make it up. The material's good enough on its own.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I believe you. So all right, well, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it. I'll send you a link once the interview's up and everything. And yeah, thank you again so much for coming on, and hopefully I'll be able to talk to you again soon.